As she walked past the Millionaire, the gardener froze when she saw his pendant. It was the same one her mother wore when she disappeared over 20 years ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across the overgrown gardens of Whitaker Estate as Chloe Sullivan stepped out of her beaten-up pickup truck, her work boots crunching on the gravel driveway. She'd been in the landscaping business for 6 years now, ever since she'd scraped together enough money to buy her first set of professional tools. But jobs like this one still made her heart race a little. The kind of money these Charleston mansions threw around could keep her small business afloat for months. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, adjusting the gold heart pendant that hung around her neck. The only thing she had left of her mother? It was half of a heart, broken clean down the middle, and she'd worn it every day since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother Nancy had given it to her after her parents died, telling her it would keep her mother's love close to her heart. The estate stretched before her like something out of a Southern Gothic novel. Spanish moss draped the ancient oak trees, and the main house stood 3 stories tall with white columns that had seen better days. But it was the gardens that caught her attention, or what was left of them. Years of neglect had turned what must have been spectacular flower beds into a tangle of weeds and overgrown shrubs. "Miss Sullivan," a woman's voice called from the front porch. Chloe looked up to see an elegant figure descending the steps, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Everything about her screamed old money and good breeding. "I'm Ashley Whitaker. Thank you so much for coming out on such short notice." "No problem at all," Chloe replied. Extending her hand, Ashley's grip was firm but brief, her smile polite but somehow not quite reaching her eyes. "I have to say, you've got incredible potential here. These gardens could be absolutely stunning with the right care." "That's exactly what we're hoping for," Ashley said, leading Chloe along a stone path that wound through the property. "My fiancé and I are planning our wedding for next spring, and we want everything to be perfect. Richard has very specific ideas about what he wants." Something in the way Ashley said his name made Chloe glance at her sideways. There was a tightness around her eyes, a carefully controlled tone that suggested things weren't as smooth as she wanted them to appear. "Will I be meeting with him today?" Chloe asked, pulling out her tablet to take notes. "He should be here any minute," Ashley replied, checking her watch. "He's been difficult lately, lost in the past, you might say. I'm hoping this project will give him something positive to focus on." Before Chloe could ask what she meant, the sound of tires on gravel announced another arrival. A black Mercedes pulled up next to Chloe's truck, looking ridiculously out of place next to her weather-beaten pickup. The man who emerged was tall and distinguished, probably in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of bearing that came from years of commanding boardrooms. But it was his eyes that caught Chloe off guard. They were haunted, carrying a weight that seemed to press down on his shoulders. "Richard Evans," he said, extending his hand to Chloe. His grip was warm and firm, and when their eyes met, something strange happened, a jolt of recognition that made no sense at all, because she was absolutely certain she'd never seen this man before in her life. "Chloe Sullivan," she managed, trying to shake off the odd feeling. "I was just telling Miss Whitaker how much potential these gardens have." Richard nodded, but his attention seemed to drift as he looked around the property. "My late wife loved gardens," he said quietly. "She always said they were places where broken things could grow beautiful again." Ashley's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "Darling, we discussed this. This project is about our future, not the past." But Richard wasn't listening. His hand had moved unconsciously to his chest, and Chloe caught a glimpse of something gold glinting beneath his shirt collar. Her own hand moved instinctively to her pendant, and Richard's eyes followed the motion. When he saw the half-heart hanging around her neck, his face went completely white. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Chloe's fingers closed protectively around the pendant. "It was my mother's. She died when I was 7. Richard fumbled with his shirt collar, pulling out a chain of his own. At the end of it hung a piece of gold that made Chloe's world tilt sideways. The other half of her heart, the jagged edges would fit together perfectly. She knew without even trying. "Rebecca," Richard breathed, staring at Chloe with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Rebecca Brooks, was that your mother's name?" The blood drained from Chloe's face. No one had spoken her mother's name in years. Grandma Nancy barely remembered her own name these days, let alone stories from the past. "How do you know that name?" "Richard," Ashley's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "I think we should focus on the landscaping consultation. Miss Sullivan has a business to run, I'm sure." But Richard seemed frozen, staring at Chloe as if he were seeing a ghost. "You have her eyes," he murmured. "The same green eyes. And that stubborn little chin she used to get when she was thinking hard about something. You knew my mother." Chloe's voice cracked slightly. She'd spent 21 years wondering about the woman who'd given birth to her, surviving on the few scattered memories Grandma Nancy could still recall. And now this stranger was talking about Rebecca like he'd known her intimately. "I loved her," Richard said simply, and the raw pain in his voice made Chloe's chest tighten. "She disappeared 28 years ago, just vanished without a trace. I've been looking for her ever since." Ashley stepped between them, her professional smile never wavering but her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "This is all very fascinating, but I'm sure Miss Sullivan didn't come here to discuss ancient history. Perhaps we should focus on the reason we called her." Chloe wanted to push past Ashley, to demand answers from this man who seemed to hold pieces of her past. But the landscaper in her recognized the tension crackling between the couple, and her business instincts warned her not to get caught in the middle of whatever this was. "Of course," she said, though every fiber of her being wanted to keep talking about her mother. "Why don't you show me exactly what you have in mind for the space?" The next hour passed in a blur of measurements and notes. But Chloe's mind was spinning. Richard stayed close throughout the consultation, stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. Ashley, meanwhile, seemed determined to keep the conversation strictly professional, steering them away from any topic that might circle back to the past by the time Chloe packed her equipment back into the truck. She had a solid plan for transforming the Whitaker Gardens and a head full of questions that weren't going to let her sleep tonight. Richard walked her to her vehicle, Ashley trailing behind with obvious reluctance. "I know this might sound strange," Richard said quietly, "but would you be willing to have coffee with me sometime? I'd like to tell you about your mother, the Rebecca I knew." "Richard," Ashley interjected, her voice sharp with warning. "I'd like that," Chloe said quickly, before Ashley could shut down the conversation entirely. "I'd like that very much." As she drove away from Whitaker Estate, Chloe caught a glimpse of Ashley in her rearview mirror, standing rigid on the front steps while Richard watched the truck disappear down the long driveway. The woman's expression was anything but pleased, and something about the calculating look in her eyes made Chloe's skin crawl. That evening, Chloe sat beside her grandmother's bed in their small apartment above the flower shop, watching Nancy sleep fitfully. At 78, her grandmother was fading fast, the Alzheimer's stealing more of her memories each day. But maybe, just maybe, she'd have some lucid moments left. Moments when she might remember something about Rebecca Brooks and the mysterious man who claimed to have loved her. Chloe fingered her half-heart pendant, wondering if she was finally going to get answers to questions that had haunted her entire life. She had no way of knowing that some secrets were buried for good reason, or that digging them up might cost her everything she had left to lose. 3 days had passed since the encounter at Whitaker Estate, and Chloe couldn't shake the image of Richard Evans's haunted eyes, or the way he'd said her mother's name like a prayer. She'd been planning to wait for his call about that coffee, but Nancy had been having one of her bad weeks, more confused than usual, calling Chloe by her mother's name and asking when Rebecca was coming home from work. "Grandma, it's me, Chloe," she said gently, setting down a cup of chamomile tea on the nightstand. "Rebecca was my mother, remember? She died a long time ago." Nancy's roomy eyes focused on her with sudden clarity, the kind that had become increasingly rare. When these moments came, they were like glimpses of sunlight breaking through storm clouds, brief but brilliant. "Rebecca didn't die," Nancy said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "That's what they wanted everyone to think. But she didn't die. She was murdered." Chloe's hand froze halfway to the teacup. "What did you say?" "She found out about the clinic," Nancy continued, her fingers gripping Chloe's wrist with surprising strength. "The things they were doing to those poor people. She tried to stop them, and they killed her for it." "Grandma, what clinic? What are you talking about?" But the moment was already fading. Nancy's eyes grew distant again, and she looked at Chloe with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, dear, but do I know you?" "Are you one of the nurses?" Chloe's heart sank as she watched her grandmother slip back into the fog of dementia, but Nancy's words echoed in her mind. She was murdered, not died in an accident like she'd always been told. Murdered. And something about a clinic. That evening, Chloe climbed the narrow stairs to the apartment's small attic space. Something she hadn't done in years. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old cardboard, and she had to duck to avoid hitting her head on the low beams. Nancy had stored boxes up here when they'd moved in after Chloe's parents died. Things that were too precious to throw away but too painful to look at every day. It took her an hour to find what she was looking for. A battered shoebox labeled Rebecca's Things in Nancy's careful handwriting. Inside, she found a few photos, some costume jewelry, and a manila envelope stuffed with papers. Most of it was routine. Old bills, a lease agreement, a few letters from Nancy. But at the bottom of the pile, Chloe's fingers closed around something that made her breath catch. It was a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local Nurse Missing After Clinic Investigation." The article was brief, but it mentioned Rebecca Brooks by name, describing her as a whistleblower who had been cooperating with authorities investigating irregularities at an unnamed medical facility. The date was 28 years ago, just a few months before Chloe was born. Her hands shaking, Chloe pulled out her phone and took pictures of everything in the box. Nancy might not remember the details, but these papers suggested she'd been telling the truth. Rebecca had been involved in exposing something at a clinic, and now she was dead, 15 miles away. Richard Evans sat in his study nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at a framed photograph that had lived in his desk drawer for nearly 3 decades. Rebecca's face smiled back at him. Frozen in time at 22 years old, he'd taken the picture during their weekend getaway to Savannah. Back when they'd thought they had all the time in the world. "She's gone, Richard." Ashley's voice from the doorway made him startle. He'd been so lost in memories that he hadn't heard her come in. "Rebecca is gone. She has been for 28 years. "I know that," he said quietly, but he didn't put the photo away. Ashley crossed the room and perched on the arm of his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "This girl, this landscaper, she's not Rebecca. She's just someone who happens to look like her and has half of an old necklace." "The same necklace," Richard corrected. "The exact same one, down to the little scratch on the edge where Rebecca dropped it that time we went hiking." "Coincidences happen," Ashley said, but there was something tight in her voice. "And even if she is somehow related to Rebecca, dwelling on the past isn't going to bring her back. We have a future to build together." Richard looked up at his fiancée, this brilliant woman who had stood by him through 2 years of grief after his wife Margaret's death, who had patiently endured his obsession with a lost love from decades ago. Ashley deserved better than a man who couldn't let go of ghosts. "You're right," he said, closing the desk drawer. "I'm sorry, this whole thing just caught me off guard." Ashley smiled and pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "I understand, but maybe it's time to think about getting some help. Those nightmares have been getting worse lately." The nightmares. Richard had been having them for months now. Always the same fragments. Rebecca calling his name, reaching out for him, her voice echoing as if from a great distance. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart racing, feeling like he'd forgotten something crucial. "Dr. Martinez has been helping me work through my grief," Ashley continued. "I could ask her for a referral to someone who specializes in trauma therapy." "Maybe," Richard murmured, but his mind was already drifting back to Chloe Sullivan and those familiar green eyes. There had been something about her, not just the physical resemblance to Rebecca, but something deeper, a recognition that went beyond logic. "I'm going to make some tea," Ashley said, standing. "Why don't you try to get some sleep? Tomorrow's a big day with the pharmaceutical board meeting." After she left, Richard pulled out his phone and stared at the business card Chloe had given him. He should probably listen to Ashley, should focus on moving forward instead of digging up the past. But he couldn't shake the feeling that meeting Chloe Sullivan wasn't a coincidence. It felt like an answer to a question he'd been asking for 28 years. In the kitchen, Ashley waited until she heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs, before pulling out her own phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for, then hit dial. "It's me," she said quietly when the call connected. "We have a problem. Richard met Rebecca's daughter today." The voice on the other end was sharp with concern. "Are you certain it's her? She has the necklace, the other half of the heart." Ashley's grip tightened on the phone. "And she looks exactly like Rebecca did at that age, If Richard starts digging around, asking questions, how much does the girl know? Nothing, as far as I can tell. But the old woman might still remember things. We should have dealt with her years ago. Too risky then. Too many eyes on her after the daughter moved in. But maybe now. The voice trailed off thoughtfully. Can you get close to them? Gain their trust? Ashley smiled, the expression cold and calculating. I'm already working on it. Richard mentioned wanting to have coffee with the girl. Tell her about her mother. I'll make sure I'm part of that conversation. Good. And Ashley, if the old woman starts remembering too much, we may need to accelerate her decline. Alzheimer's patients have such unpredictable episodes. Sometimes their hearts just give out from the stress. Ashley ended the call and deleted it from her phone's history. Then began preparing Richard's nightly tea. She added his usual dose of melatonin, the mild sedative that helped with his insomnia. But tonight she added something else. Something that would ensure his dreams were particularly vivid and disturbing. The nightmares served a dual purpose. They kept Richard focused on his grief and loss, rather than moving forward. And they provided perfect cover for her concern about his mental health. Soon, she'd suggest he needed stronger medication, something to help him cope with the trauma of the past, something that would make him more malleable, more dependent on her guidance. As she carried the tea upstairs, Ashley reflected on how perfectly everything had fallen into place. She'd spent 2 years positioning herself as Richard's savior, the woman who would help him heal from his losses, the pharmaceutical fortune, the social connections, the power that came with being Mrs. Richard Evans. It was all within her grasp. She wasn't about to let some landscaper with a sentimental necklace destroy everything she'd worked for. The past needed to stay buried, and Ashley Whitaker had spent 28 years making sure it would. Chloe spent the next morning researching everything she could find about Dr. Ashley Whitaker online. What she discovered was impressive, almost suspiciously so. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins, residency at Mayo Clinic, board certifications in both internal medicine and geriatrics. Her professional photos showed a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a medical journal. Confident, competent, caring, the perfect doctor. But something nagged at Chloe as she scrolled through Ashley's credentials. For someone who'd been practicing medicine for over 15 years, there was remarkably little personal information available. No mention of where she'd grown up. No college newspaper articles. No social media presence that went back more than 5 years. It was as if Dr. Ashley Whitaker had materialized fully formed in the medical world without a past. The bell above the flower shop door chimed, interrupting her research. Chloe looked up to see Ashley herself walking in, perfectly put together in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Chloe made in a month. I hope you don't mind me dropping by, Ashley said, her smile warm and seemingly genuine. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to apologize for yesterday. Richard can be intense when it comes to memories of his past relationships. Chloe closed her laptop, feeling oddly caught off guard. No apology necessary. I can't imagine how difficult it must be for him, losing someone he loved. That's very understanding of you, Ashley said, moving closer to examine the flower arrangements Chloe had been working on. These are beautiful. You're clearly talented at bringing life to things that have wilted. There was something in the way she said it that made Chloe's skin prickle, but Ashley's expression remained pleasant. Thank you. It's what I love about this work, helping things grow. Speaking of growth, I noticed you mentioned caring for your grandmother yesterday. That must be challenging at your age. Ashley's voice carried the professional sympathy Chloe had heard from Nancy's doctors. Alzheimer's is such a cruel disease. Some days are harder than others, Chloe admitted. She has moments of clarity, but they're getting rarer. I specialize in geriatric care, actually. If you'd ever like me to take a look at her, I'd be happy to help. Sometimes a fresh perspective can make all the difference in managing symptoms. The offer sounded genuine, caring even, but something made Chloe hesitate. That's very kind, but she's been seeing Dr. Morrison for years. I wouldn't want to complicate her care. Of course not, Ashley said quickly. I just hate to see families struggling when there might be better options available. Some of the newer treatments can really slow the progression of cognitive decline. Before Chloe could respond, her phone rang. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and she felt her pulse quicken. Ashley noticed her reaction and raised an eyebrow. I should take this, Chloe said, accepting the call. Hello. Chloe, it's Richard. I was wondering if you'd like to have that coffee we talked about today if you're free. She could feel Ashley watching her intently. I'd like that. When and where? There's a cafe called Magnolia's on King Street. How about 2 o'clock? Perfect. I'll see you there. When she hung up, Ashley was still studying her face. Coffee with Richard, she asked, her tone carefully neutral. He wants to tell me about my mother. Chloe wasn't sure why she felt the need to explain, but something about Ashley's presence made her defensive. That's sweet of him, Ashley said, though her smile seemed to tighten slightly. He's been carrying a torch for Rebecca Brooks for nearly 3 decades. I suppose it's natural he'd want to share those memories with someone who reminds him of her, the way Ashley said her mother's name, clinically, like a diagnosis rather than a person, bothered Chloe more than she could articulate. Did you know her, my mother? Oh no. This was all long before my time in Charleston. I only know what Richard's told me over the years. Ashley glanced at her watch. Well, I should let you get ready for your coffee date. Just remember, grief can make people see connections that aren't really there. Sometimes the kindest thing is to help them let go of the past. After Ashley left, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just been warned off. The doctor's words had sounded caring, but there was steel underneath the sympathy. She thought about Nancy's confused ramblings about a clinic, about Rebecca being murdered, and wondered if there was more to her mother's story than anyone wanted her to know. At exactly 2 o'clock, Chloe walked into Magnolia's and spotted Richard immediately. He was sitting at a corner table, staring out the window with that same haunted expression she'd noticed at the estate. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her chest tighten. "Thank you for coming," he said, standing to pull out her chair. The gesture was old-fashioned and sweet, and it reminded Chloe that she knew nothing about proper manners or fine dining. Her upbringing had been loving but simple. "Thank you for asking," she replied, settling into her seat. "I have to admit, I've been curious about what you might remember about my mother." Richard's hand moved unconsciously to his chest, where she knew the other half of the heart pendant rested. Rebecca was extraordinary, brilliant, passionate about helping people, completely fearless when she believed in something. What did she do, for work, I mean? She was a nurse, but not the typical kind. She worked with underserved populations, free clinics, places where people went when they couldn't afford regular medical care. Richard's eyes grew distant. She had this way of making everyone feel like they mattered, like their pain was important. Chloe thought about the newspaper clipping she'd found. Did she ever mention anything about problems at work? Anything that might have put her in danger? Something flickered across Richard's face. A shadow of memory. Perhaps, or fear. "Why do you ask?" "My grandmother said something the other day. She gets confused a lot, but sometimes she remembers things from the past more clearly than the present. She said my mother didn't die in an accident. She said she was murdered." Richard went very still. "Nancy said that. You know my grandmother. Rebecca mentioned her sister who helped take care of things when their parents died." Richard's voice was careful now, measured. "But Chloe, grief and illness can distort memories. Nancy's been dealing with Alzheimer's for years." It was almost exactly what Ashley had said, and hearing it from Richard made Chloe feel foolish for believing her grandmother's confused ramblings. But something in his expression suggested he wasn't telling her everything. "Tell me about the last time you saw her," Chloe said instead. Richard was quiet for a long moment, his fingers turning his coffee cup in slow circles. "She came to see me at my apartment. This was before I had any real money. Before the pharmaceutical company took off. I was just a guy with a chemistry degree and big dreams." What did she want to talk about? She was upset about something at work. Said she'd discovered something that could hurt a lot of people. But she couldn't tell me the details yet. She needed to be sure before she acted. Richard's voice grew thick with old pain. "I told her to be careful, that whatever it was could wait until she had more support. I should have insisted she tell me everything right then." "What happened after that?" "She kissed me goodbye and said she'd call me the next day. But she never did. When I went to her apartment, the landlord said she'd moved out suddenly. Left no forwarding address. I spent months looking for her, hiring private investigators, following every lead." Richard met Chloe's eyes. "I never stopped looking. Not really. Even after I married Margaret. Even after I tried to convince myself I'd moved on." The pain in his voice was so raw that Chloe found herself reaching across the table to touch his hand. "I'm sorry, that must have been terrible." Finding you feels like a miracle, Richard said quietly. Like Rebecca found a way to come back to me. Before Chloe could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Your grandmother had an episode. She's asking for you. Come home quickly, Dr. Ashley Whitaker. I have to go, Chloe said, already standing. Something's wrong with Nancy. Richard was on his feet immediately. I'll drive you. They raced across Charleston in Richard's Mercedes, Chloe's heart hammering with fear. When they reached the flower shop, they found Ashley's car already parked outside. The doctor met them at the door, her face grave with professional concern. I was checking on her like I promised, Ashley explained. She was very agitated, calling out for Rebecca, saying someone was trying to hurt her. I've given her a mild sedative to help her calm down. Chloe rushed upstairs to find Nancy lying in bed, her eyes glassy and unfocused. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than she had that morning. Grandma, it's me, Chloe. Nancy turned toward her voice, but her gaze was vacant. The doctor said I shouldn't talk about the clinic anymore. She said it would only upset people. Chloe felt a chill run down her spine. She looked back at Ashley, who was watching from the doorway with what looked like genuine sympathy. Sometimes patients fixate on imaginary scenarios, Ashley said softly. It's part of the disease progression. The important thing is keeping her comfortable and not encouraging delusions that might distress her further. But as Chloe held her grandmother's hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that Nancy's delusions were the only truth anyone was willing to tell her. The sedative Ashley had given Nancy kept her grandmother sleeping for nearly 18 hours. When she finally woke, she was more confused than ever, staring at Chloe with the polite bewilderment of someone meeting a stranger. The clarity that had allowed her to speak about Rebecca and the clinic seemed to have vanished completely, leaving behind only fragments and shadows. Chloe sat beside the bed, holding Nancy's frail hand and trying not to let her frustration show. Every lead felt like it was slipping through her fingers, every answer dissolving before she could grasp it fully. But she couldn't shake the newspaper clipping she'd found, or the way Richard's expression had changed when she'd mentioned her mother being murdered. I'm going to find some answers, Grandma, she whispered, even though Nancy showed no sign of understanding. I promise. 3 days later, Chloe found herself standing in the parking lot of Palmetto Shopping Center, staring up at the gleaming facade of what had once been something much darker. According to the property records she'd dug up at the county clerk's office, this land had housed the Riverside Community Clinic until 29 years ago, when it had been demolished to make way for commercial development. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The clinic had been torn down just 1 year after Rebecca's disappearance, after the investigation mentioned in that newspaper clipping had apparently gone nowhere. Someone had been very thorough about erasing the past. Chloe walked through the shopping center, trying to imagine what it might have looked like before. The layout was sprawling and modern, all glass storefronts and polished floors. But if she squinted and used her landscaper's eye for reading the bones of a space, she could see where the original building might have stood. Probably where the anchor store was now, maybe extending back toward what was currently the food court. Can I help you with something? The voice made her jump. She turned to see an elderly man in a maintenance uniform watching her with curious eyes. His name tag read, Earl, and he had the weathered look of someone who'd been working with his hands for decades. I'm sorry, I was just looking around, Chloe said. I'm trying to learn about what used to be here before the shopping center. Earl's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. That's going back a long time, before my time here. Something in his tone suggested otherwise. You didn't work at the clinic, did you? Lady, I don't know what you're talking about. But his eyes darted toward the security cameras mounted overhead, and Chloe noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Please, she said, lowering her voice. My mother worked here, Rebecca Brooks. She disappeared 28 years ago, and I'm just trying to understand what happened to her. Earl's face went pale. He looked around the shopping center as if checking for watchers, then grabbed Chloe's arm. Not here, he muttered. Too many eyes. Meet me at Denny's on Rivers Avenue at 8 tonight. Come alone. Before Chloe could respond, he'd melted back into the crowd of shoppers, leaving her standing alone with her heart racing. Someone else remembered. Someone who might have answers. Meanwhile, Richard Evans sat in his office at Evans Pharmaceuticals, staring at a stack of financial reports without really seeing them. His conversation with Chloe had stirred up memories he'd spent years trying to bury, and now they were clawing their way to the surface with renewed intensity. He'd been thinking about the last night he'd spent with Rebecca, trying to remember every detail of their conversation. She'd been frightened, he realized now. At the time, he'd thought she was just stressed about work, but looking back with 28 years of perspective, he could see the signs of genuine fear in her behavior. She needed to be sure before she acted, he'd told Chloe. But what if Rebecca had been sure? What if she'd already acted? And that's what had gotten her killed. Richard pulled out his laptop and began searching through old files, looking for anything that might connect to Rebecca's work. Evans Pharmaceuticals had been just a startup back then, but they'd been trying to partner with various medical facilities for drug trials and research opportunities. If Rebecca had discovered something about illegal experiments, there might be records of which clinics they'd been working with. It took him 2 hours of digging through archived emails and contracts, but eventually he found what he was looking for. In 1996, just 6 months before Rebecca disappeared, Evans Pharmaceuticals had signed a consulting agreement with Riverside Community Clinic for a study on experimental pain medications. The contract was signed by Dr. Ashley Whitaker. Richard stared at the signature, his blood turning to ice. Ashley had been at the clinic. She'd been there when Rebecca was investigating whatever had gotten her killed, and she'd never mentioned it. Not once in the 2 years they'd been together had she said anything about knowing Rebecca or working at the same facility, his hands shaking. Richard pulled up Ashley's employment history on his computer. According to her resume, she'd never worked at Riverside Community Clinic. Her career history showed a seamless progression from medical school to residency, to her current position, with no gap that would account for time at a community clinic in Charleston. Someone was lying. Either the contract was fake, or Ashley had deliberately omitted a crucial piece of her professional history, and given that Rebecca had been investigating illegal medical experiments at a clinic where Ashley had apparently worked, Richard was beginning to suspect which explanation was more likely. At 8 o'clock that evening, Chloe sat in a corner booth at Denny's, nursing a cup of coffee and checking her watch every few minutes. Earl was late, and she was starting to worry that he'd changed his mind about meeting her. Finally, at 8:15, she saw him shuffle through the door. He looked even more nervous than he had at the shopping center, his eyes darting around the restaurant before he spotted her and made his way over. "Sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Had to make sure I wasn't followed." "Followed by who?" Earl signaled the waitress for coffee before answering. "People who don't want the past dug up. People who've spent a lot of money making sure certain stories stay buried. You worked at the clinic, didn't you?" "Maintenance and security," Earl confirmed. 23 years old and stupid enough to think I was just keeping the lights on and the doors locked. Didn't realize what I was really guarding until it was too late. What was happening there? Earl was quiet, until the waitress brought his coffee and moved away. Then he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. They were testing drugs on people who couldn't say no. Homeless folks, addicts, immigrants who didn't speak English, promised them free medical care, and then used them like lab rats. Chloe felt sick. That's what my mother discovered. Rebecca was the only one who gave a damn about those patients. She started asking questions when people began dying from the treatments. Real deaths, not the kind you could blame on their existing conditions. Earl's hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee. She gathered evidence, took photos, copied files. She was going to blow the whole thing wide open, but she disappeared before she could. The night before she was supposed to meet with federal investigators. Earl's voice was heavy with old guilt. I should have warned her, should have told her they knew what she was planning. How did they know? Someone on the inside was feeding them information. Someone Rebecca trusted. Earl met her eyes. Someone who's still alive and still in Charleston, living a very comfortable life on blood money. Chloe's heart was pounding. Do you know who? Before Earl could answer, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went white. I have to go. They know I'm here. Wait, Chloe said, but Earl was already standing. Find Carol Martinez, he said quickly. She was the midwife who helped with the pregnant patients. If anyone knows what really happened to your mother. It's her. He threw a $10 bill on the table and hurried toward the exit, leaving Chloe alone with more questions than answers. But at least now she had a name. Carol Martinez, back at Whitaker Estate. Ashley sat in her study reviewing patient files when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized. one of her most reliable sources of information. She's asking questions, the voice said without preamble. Met with Earl Patterson tonight. He gave her Carol's name. Ashley closed her eyes, feeling a familiar headache building behind her temples. She'd spent 28 years carefully constructing her new life, and now it was all threatening to unravel because of one persistent girl with a sentimental necklace. Where's Carol now? Same nursing home where she's been for the past 5 years. Alzheimer's ward. She hasn't spoken coherently in months. Good. What about Patterson? Taken care of. It'll look like a heart attack. Man his age, working nights, all that stress. These things happen. Ashley felt no remorse. Earl Patterson had been a liability for decades, and she'd let him live far longer than was wise out of misplaced sentiment. But sentiment was a luxury she could no longer afford. And the girl, still digging. She's going to find Carol tomorrow, most likely. Then we need to accelerate the timeline, Ashley said. The old woman's condition needs to worsen, dramatically. A stroke, maybe, or a severe cardiac episode brought on by the stress of her granddaughter's investigation into painful family history. What about Evans? He's been asking questions too. Ashley smiled coldly. Richard's newfound curiosity was actually working in her favor. Let me handle Richard. By the time I'm finished with him, he'll be so medicated and confused he won't remember his own name, let alone be able to cause trouble. After she hung up, Ashley poured herself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out over the gardens where she'd first encountered Chloe Sullivan. Everything had been going so perfectly. Her engagement to Richard was set to be announced publicly next month, cementing her position as the future Mrs. Evans and giving her access to the pharmaceutical fortune she'd been planning to acquire for years. But Rebecca Brooks had always been a problem. Even in death, the woman had been too idealistic, too determined to do the right thing regardless of consequences. And now her daughter was proving to be cut from the same cloth. Well, Ashley had dealt with one generation of bleeding hearts. She could certainly handle another. The past was going to stay buried, no matter how many people she had to bury with it. Chloe woke to her phone buzzing insistently on the nightstand. The caller ID showed Richard's name, and when she answered, his voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. Earl Patterson is dead, he said without preamble. Heart attack sometime during the night. They found him in his apartment this morning. The coffee cup slipped from Chloe's fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. What? But I just saw him last night. He was fine. I know. I've been doing some digging of my own, and I found something you need to see. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? Richard. Please, Chloe. I think we're both in danger. An hour later, Chloe sat in the plush executive office of Evans Pharmaceuticals, staring at a contract that made her blood run cold. Ashley's signature was right there in black ink, proof that she'd been at the clinic when Rebecca was investigating the illegal experiments. She lied to me, Richard said, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. For 2 years, she's been lying about knowing Rebecca, about working at that clinic, and now Earl is dead, just hours after he talked to you. It could be a coincidence, Chloe said, but her voice lacked conviction. Could it? How many coincidences are we supposed to believe? Richard stopped pacing and fixed her with those haunted eyes. I found something else. Ashley's been medicating me for months, supposedly for my nightmares and anxiety, but I had my blood tested yesterday, and there are compounds in my system that aren't in any of the medications she prescribed. Chloe felt the world tilt sideways. She's been drugging you, keeping me compliant, confused, dependent on her for emotional support. Richard's jaw was tight with anger. I've been such a fool. Before Chloe could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed the name of Sunset Manor, the nursing home where she'd finally tracked down Carol Martinez. Miss Sullivan, this is Nancy Rodriguez from Sunset Manor. I'm calling about Carol Martinez. You left a message saying you wanted to visit her. Yes. Is she available to see visitors today? There was a pause. I'm afraid Mrs. Martinez had a stroke early this morning. She's been asking for someone named Rebecca. Very agitated. The doctors say she may not have much time left. Chloe's grip tightened on the phone. We'll be right there. Richard asked as she hung up. Carol had a stroke this morning. She's dying, Richard, and she's asking for my mother. Chloe stood, her hands shaking. I need to see her before it's too late. The drive to Sunset Manor passed in tense silence. both of them lost in their own thoughts. Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that whatever window of opportunity she had to learn the truth was closing fast. Carol Martinez was a shell of the woman she must have once been. The stroke had left her partially paralyzed, her speech slurred and difficult to understand. But when Chloe walked into the hospital room where she'd been transferred, Carol's eyes sharpened with unmistakable recognition. "Rebecca," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, I'm Chloe, Rebecca's daughter." Chloe took the old woman's hand gently. "Carol, I need to know what happened to my mother." Carol's eyes filled with tears, and she struggled to form words. I saved you. Saved you from her. From who, Carol? Who killed my mother? The doctor. The blonde doctor. She made Rebecca." Carol's breathing was labored, each word a struggle. "Made her give birth in that terrible place. Was going to kill you both." Richard leaned forward from his position by the window. "Carol, what doctor? What was her name?" "Whitaker," Carol gasped. "Ashley Whitaker. She was so young then, but already so cold, so ambitious." The name hit Richard like a physical blow. He sank into the chair beside Chloe, his face white with shock. "Ashley killed Rebecca." Carol nodded weakly. "Rebecca found out about the experiments, was going to expose everything, but she was pregnant. Didn't know until it was too late to run. Pregnant." Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "My mother was pregnant when she died. 8 months, Carol confirmed. Tried to hide it, but Ashley figured it out. Used it against her. Said if Rebecca talked, she'd make sure the baby suffered for it." Richard's hands were shaking. "The baby, Chloe, if Rebecca was 8 months pregnant 28 years ago, you're my father," Chloe finished, the pieces finally clicking into place. The recognition she'd felt when they first met. The way he'd responded to her pendant, the protective instinct that had drawn him to her. Carol squeezed Chloe's hand with surprising strength. "Rebecca loved you both so much. Talked about you constantly, Richard. How she was going to tell you about the baby after she exposed the clinic." "What happened the night she died?" Richard asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Ashley took her to the old clinic basement, made her give birth there, wanted to stage it like Rebecca died in childbirth from complications. Was going to kill you too," Carol said to Chloe. "But I was there to help with the delivery. Couldn't let an innocent baby die for her mother's conscience. How did you save me? When you were born, I told Ashley you weren't breathing. Made her think you were already dead. She was so focused on killing Rebecca. She didn't check. I took you out with the medical waste. But you were fine. Breathing. Healthy. Perfect." Tears were streaming down Chloe's face. "And Rebecca. Ashley gave her an injection. Something that would stop her heart but look natural. Rebecca's last words were about you both. 'Tell them I love them,' she said. 'Tell them the truth someday.'" Richard buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. 28 years of searching, of wondering, and his daughter had been alive all along. "Where is Rebecca buried?" Chloe asked. "Basement of the old clinic. Ashley sealed the room after that night. Said it was contaminated. But I knew the truth. I tried to tell people. But who would believe a midwife against a doctor? Carol, why didn't you contact Richard? Let him know about Chloe. Ashley threatened me. Said if I ever talked, she'd make sure I ended up like Rebecca. I was young, scared. I just wanted to make sure the baby was safe." Carol's grip on Chloe's hand was weakening. "Gave you to Rebecca's sister, Nancy. She promised to love you like her own." "Nancy isn't my grandmother," Chloe whispered. "She's my aunt. Best woman I ever knew," Carol said. "Knew the risks, but took you anyway. Cut all ties with the outside world to keep you safe." "Carol," Richard said urgently, "do you have any proof? Anything that could expose Ashley?" "Photos," Carol gasped. "Took photos that night. Hidden them all these years. In my apartment. Under the floorboards. Bedroom closet." Carol's eyes were growing glassy, her breathing more labored. "Promise me," she whispered. "Promise you'll stop her. She's still hurting people. Still playing God with lives." "We promise," Chloe said, tears streaming down her face. "Tell Rebecca. When you find her, tell her I kept my word. Her baby girl grew up strong and good. Carol Martinez closed her eyes and took her last breath, taking with her 28 years of guilt and secrets. But she'd given them what they needed: proof that Ashley Whitaker was a killer, and the location of evidence that could finally bring her to justice. Richard stood and pulled Chloe into his arms, both of them crying for the woman they'd loved and lost, and for the years they'd been kept apart by a murderer's lies. "We're going to stop her," Richard whispered into Chloe's hair. "I promise you. We're going to make Ashley pay for what she did to our family." But even as he spoke the words, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley was already 3 steps ahead of them. She'd managed to keep her secrets for 28 years, eliminating anyone who threatened to expose the truth, and now she knew they were closing in. In her office across town, Ashley Whitaker sat reviewing Carol Martinez's death certificate, which had been expedited through the system with unusual speed. The old woman's stroke had been perfectly timed, and Ashley felt a familiar satisfaction at another loose end tied up. But her satisfaction was short-lived. Her phone buzzed with a text from one of her surveillance contacts. Evans and the girl visited Carol before she died. "They know about the clinic." Ashley's grip tightened on the phone. Time was running out faster than she'd anticipated. Richard and Chloe were no longer just asking questions. They were actively investigating, and if Carol had told them about the photos hidden in her apartment, they might already have the evidence they needed to destroy her. It was time to stop playing defensive. Ashley Whitaker had spent 28 years building her perfect life on Rebecca Brooks's grave, and she wasn't about to let anyone destroy it now. Richard Evans and his daughter were about to learn that some secrets were worth killing for. Again, Chloe and Richard drove to Carol's apartment in silence, both still reeling from the revelations that had turned their worlds upside down. Father and daughter. The words felt strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. 28 years of searching had finally led Richard to the family he'd never known he'd lost. But the joy of discovery was overshadowed by the horror of how they'd been kept apart. Carol's apartment was in a rundown complex on the outskirts of Charleston, the kind of place where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. The landlord, a gruff man in his 60s, handed over the keys without much ceremony, after Richard showed him Carol's death certificate and claimed to be settling her estate. "Kept to herself mostly," the landlord said. "Paid her rent on time. Never caused trouble. Shame what happened to her." Inside, the apartment was small but meticulously clean. Carol had lived simply. A few pieces of worn furniture, some medical textbooks from her midwifery days, photographs of babies she'd helped bring into the world. But it was clear she'd been living with the weight of terrible secrets. They found the loose floorboard in the bedroom closet exactly where Carol had said it would be. Richard pried it up with a screwdriver from Carol's kitchen drawer, revealing a metal box wrapped in plastic to protect it from moisture. Inside the box were photographs that made Chloe's stomach turn, images of the clinic's basement, of medical equipment stained with blood, of patients who looked barely conscious strapped to gurneys, and in several of the photos, there was Ashley, 28 years younger but unmistakably her, wearing surgical scrubs and looking coldly professional as she prepared syringes. "Jesus," Richard breathed, staring at one particular photo that showed Ashley standing over a woman in labor. The woman's face was turned toward the camera, and even in the grainy quality of the old photograph, it was clearly Rebecca. "That's my mother," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. She looked so scared. There were documents, too. Medical records that showed the illegal drug trials, payment receipts that traced the funding back to several pharmaceutical companies, including Evans Pharmaceuticals, and a handwritten journal that detailed Carol's growing horror at what she was witnessing. "She documented everything," Richard said, flipping through the journal. "Names, dates, what drugs were being tested, how many patients died. This is enough evidence to destroy Ashley and everyone else involved." Chloe was staring at the last entry in the journal, dated the night Rebecca died. Carol's handwriting was shaky, emotional. They killed her, injected something directly into her heart after the baby was born. Dr. Whitaker said it would look like complications from childbirth. I saved the baby, but I couldn't save Rebecca. God forgive me. I was too much of a coward to try. "We need to take this to the police," Chloe said. But Richard was shaking his head. "Ashley has connections everywhere. She's been building her network for decades, and I guarantee some of those connections are in law enforcement." Richard's jaw was tight with anger. "We need more than just Carol's evidence. We need to catch Ashley in the act. Get her to confess what she did, before Chloe could respond. Her phone rang. Nancy's assisted living facility appeared on the caller ID, and Chloe's heart immediately started racing. Miss Sullivan, this is Dr. Chen. I'm afraid your grandmother has taken a severe turn for the worse. She's had what appears to be a massive stroke, and her vital signs are extremely unstable. I'll be right there, Chloe said, already heading for the door. Wait, the doctor continued. She's been asking for you specifically, and she seems very agitated. She keeps saying something about poison and doctors. The staff thought you should know she's been like this since Dr. Whitaker's visit this morning. Chloe felt the blood drain from her face. Dr. Whitaker was there. Yes. She said she was a family friend. Wanted to check on your grandmother's condition. She spent about an hour with her before the stroke occurred. Richard was already grabbing the box of evidence. Ashley's making her move, he said grimly. She knows we're getting close. They raced across Charleston. Richard's Mercedes weaving through traffic as Chloe tried to keep her panic under control. Nancy was the only family she'd ever known, the woman who'd raised her with love and sacrifice, protecting her from a truth that could have gotten them both killed if Ashley had hurt her. At the facility, they found Nancy in the intensive care unit, surrounded by beeping machines and IV tubes, but despite her condition, her eyes were alert and focused when she saw Chloe enter the room. Chloe, she whispered, her voice weak but clear. She knows. The doctor. She knows who you are. Grandma. Save your strength, Chloe said, taking Nancy's hand. No, Nancy insisted, her grip surprisingly strong. Need to tell you, before it's too late, Ashley Whitaker. She's been giving me something. Not medicine. Poison. Richard stepped closer to the bed. Nancy, what did she give you? In my tea. Every time she visited, said it would help with the confusion, but it made everything worse. Made me forget things I needed to remember. Nancy's eyes filled with tears. She's been killing me slowly, just like she killed Rebecca. Dr. Chen entered the room, looking puzzled. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've gotten some strange results from your grandmother's blood work. There are several unidentified compounds in her system, things that definitely aren't part of her normal medication regimen. Can you test for specific poisons? Richard asked. Things that might cause symptoms similar to dementia or stroke. Certainly. But why would you... Dr. Chen stopped, studying Richard's face. Mr. Evans, I thought you looked familiar. You're the pharmaceutical executive. Yes, and I think my fiancé has been slowly poisoning this woman for months. Can you run a comprehensive toxicology screen? Dr. Chen's expression shifted to professional alarm. I'll order it immediately. If someone has been deliberately administering toxic substances, we need to know what we're dealing with to counteract them. As the doctor hurried out, Nancy squeezed Chloe's hand again. There's something else, she whispered, hidden in the flower shop, under the loose board by the register. Rebecca, she left something for you. What kind of something? Letters and a recording. She knew they were going to kill her, so she made sure there would be evidence. Nancy's breathing was becoming labored. Ashley's been looking for it all these years. That's why she kept coming around. Pretending to help, she was searching. The implications hit Chloe like a freight train. Nancy, how long has Ashley been visiting you? 2 years, ever since she started dating Richard. Said she wanted to help with my care, but she was really trying to find out what I knew, what Rebecca might have left behind. Richard's face was white with rage and betrayal. She's been using me this entire time, getting close to me so she could monitor Nancy, searching for evidence that could destroy her. More than that, Nancy said, her voice growing weaker. She's been planning to marry you to get control of your company. She wants to expand the illegal drug testing. Use your resources to cover her tracks. A new voice cut through the room like a blade. Well, what a touching family reunion. They turned to see Ashley standing in the doorway, her professional smile in place but her eyes cold as winter. She was holding a syringe filled with clear liquid, and there was nothing remotely medical about the way she was pointing it at them. I have to say, I'm impressed by how much you've figured out, Ashley continued, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. Though I'm disappointed in you, Richard. I really did think we could have made a good team. You killed Rebecca, Richard said, his voice shaking with fury. You killed the woman I loved and stole my daughter from me. I did what was necessary, Ashley replied calmly. Rebecca was going to destroy years of important research. Do you have any idea how many lives we saved with those drug trials? How many medical breakthroughs came from that work? You experimented on innocent people, Chloe spat. You murdered them. I advanced medical science, Ashley corrected. Some sacrifices are necessary for the greater good. Rebecca was too idealistic to understand that. Nancy tried to sit up in her bed. You poisoned me for months. Just keeping you quiet, dear, although I have to admit, I enjoyed watching you deteriorate. It was almost poetic justice. Rebecca's sister suffering the same kind of slow death as all those clinic patients. Ashley raised the syringe. This will be much quicker, I promise. A little air embolism, and Nancy's struggle with her stroke will finally be over. Then we'll have a tragic accident in the parking lot. Grieving granddaughter and her companion, overcome with emotion, losing control of their vehicle. The evidence is already in police hands, Richard lied desperately. Even if you kill us, everyone will know what you did. Ashley laughed. Oh, Richard, I've been covering my tracks for 28 years. Do you really think I'm worried about some old photographs and a dead woman's journal? She moved toward Nancy's IV line, but Chloe stepped in front of her. You'll have to go through me first. If you insist, Ashley said, redirecting the syringe toward Chloe's neck. But she'd underestimated how much fight was left in the old woman on the hospital bed. Nancy's hand shot out, grabbing the call button for the nurse's station and pressing it frantically while shouting at the top of her lungs. Help! Murder! Someone help us! Ashley spun toward Nancy, rage distorting her perfect features. But it was too late. Footsteps were already pounding down the hallway, and hospital security would be there in seconds. This isn't over, Ashley snarled, backing toward the window. You have no idea what you're up against. She smashed the emergency window with a chair and disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the syringe and the echo of her threats. Richard pulled Chloe close as hospital staff flooded into the room, both of them shaking with adrenaline and relief. They'd survived Ashley's first direct attack, but Chloe knew her father was right. This was far from over. The police station buzzed with activity as Detective Maria Santos reviewed the evidence Chloe and Richard had brought in. The photographs from Carol's apartment were spread across her desk like pieces of a horrific puzzle, each image more damning than the last. This is substantial, Detective Santos said, studying a photo that clearly showed Ashley preparing an injection while Rebecca lay unconscious on a gurney. But building a case against someone with Dr. Whitaker's connections won't be easy. She's got friends in high places. What about the attempted murder at the hospital? Chloe asked. There were witnesses. She'll claim she was trying to help, that the syringe contained medication, Santos replied, without testing what was actually in it. We can't prove intent to harm. Richard leaned forward in his chair. Detective, Ashley Whitaker has been systematically eliminating anyone who could expose her crimes. Earl Patterson, Carol Martinez. They're both dead within days of talking to us. I understand your concerns, Mr. Evans, but we need more than circumstantial evidence to arrest someone of Dr. Whitaker's standing. We need her to make a mistake. Santos's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. After a brief exchange, she hung up with a grim expression. That was the lab. The toxicology report on your grandmother came back positive for several compounds that aren't approved for human use. Experimental neurotoxins that would cause progressive cognitive decline. She's been slowly killing Nancy for 2 years, Chloe said, her voice thick with anger. This gives us grounds for a search warrant, Santos said. But I'm willing to bet Dr. Whitaker's already disposed of any evidence at her home or office. Before anyone could respond, Richard's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the message was clear. Palmetto Shopping Center, basement level. Come alone if you want to see Rebecca one last time. Bring the girl. You have 1 hour. It's Ashley, Richard said, showing them the message. She wants us to meet her at the old clinic site. Detective Santos immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. It's obviously a trap. Of course it's a trap, Chloe said. But it's also our only chance to get her to confess. She's not going to slip up sitting in some interrogation room with her lawyers. You could wear wires, Santos suggested. We could have backup position nearby. She'll be watching for that, Richard said. Ashley's been planning this for decades. She won't take any chances. Chloe stood up, Her decision made. I'm going. This woman destroyed my family, and I'm not going to let her disappear again. Chloe, you could be walking into your death, Richard protested. Maybe. But Nancy's dying because of the poison Ashley's been giving her. And my mother's body has been rotting in that basement for 28 years. Someone needs to end this. An hour later, Chloe and Richard stood outside the Palmetto shopping center as the last of the evening shoppers headed to their cars. The mall would close soon, leaving them alone with whatever Ashley had planned. There, Richard said, pointing to a service entrance near the back of the building. A figure in a dark coat was standing beside it, clearly visible under the security lights. As they approached, Ashley stepped into the light, and Chloe was shocked by the change in her appearance. Gone was the polished, professional demeanor. Ashley's hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and there was something wild and desperate in her eyes. You came, Ashley said, her voice carrying an edge of hysteria. I wasn't sure you would. Where's my mother? Chloe demanded. Right where I left her 28 years ago. Ashley produced a key card from her pocket. Maintenance access. I've kept it all these years just in case. She led them through a maze of service corridors that most shoppers never saw, past storage rooms and utility closets, until they reached a heavy steel door marked Authorized Personnel Only. Ashley's keycard opened it with a soft beep. Beyond the door was a concrete stairwell that descended into darkness. The air grew colder as they went down, carrying the musty smell of damp concrete and something else. Something that made Chloe's stomach turn. The old clinic basement was never properly filled in when they built the shopping center, Ashley explained, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. They just sealed it off and built over it. Perfect preservation. At the bottom of the stairs was another door, this one older and rusted around the edges. Ashley opened it with an antique key, and they stepped into what could only be described as a tomb. The basement was exactly as it had been 28 years ago. Medical equipment covered in dust sheets, examination tables with leather restraints, and in the corner, a small room that had clearly been used for surgeries. The smell was overwhelming now. Decay and death, and the lingering chemical scent of medical disinfectant. She's in there, Ashley said, pointing to the surgical room. I sealed the room after that night, but I've come down here sometimes over the years to remember, to appreciate how far I've come. Richard's face was white as paper, but he forced himself to enter the smaller room, in the corner, partially hidden by a surgical sheet, were the remains of what had once been a person. Scraps of a nurse's uniform, long hair that had once been dark brown and around the neck bones, half of a gold heart pendant. Rebecca, Richard whispered, sinking to his knees beside the makeshift grave. She was so stubborn, Ashley said conversationally, as if she were discussing the weather. Right up to the end, she insisted she was doing the right thing, even when I told her the baby would die too if she didn't cooperate. Chloe felt rage building in her chest like a physical force. You're a monster. I'm a visionary, Ashley corrected. Do you have any idea how many lives have been saved because of the research we did here? How many medications exist today because we were willing to make the hard choices? You murdered innocent people, Richard said, his voice breaking. I advanced medical science by decades. Those people were going to die anyway. Homeless addicts, illegal immigrants with no future. At least their death served a purpose. Ashley moved to a cabinet and pulled out a syringe. The same type she'd threatened them with at the hospital. The irony is beautiful, don't you think, mother and daughter, father and lover, all reunited in the place where it all began. The police know where we are, Chloe lied. No, they don't. I've been monitoring police communications all day. They're still processing your so-called evidence and debating whether to issue search warrants. Ashley smiled coldly. By the time they decide to act, you'll have had a tragic accident. Carbon monoxide leak in this poorly ventilated basement so sad. She moved to a wall unit and began adjusting valves on what looked like an old heating system. This will take about 30 minutes to reach lethal levels. Enough time for me to get far away from here. You won't get away with this, Richard said, standing and moving protectively in front of Chloe. I've been getting away with it for 28 years, Ashley replied. I think my track record speaks for itself. But as she spoke, Chloe noticed something Ashley had missed in her arrogance. Richard's phone was still on, and in his coat pocket, she could see the faint glow of the screen. He'd managed to call someone during Ashley's monologue. And if they were lucky, that someone was still listening. "Tell me something," Chloe said. "Trying to buy time. Why Richard? Why get involved with him specifically?" "Research at first," Ashley admitted. "His pharmaceutical company was small but growing, and I needed resources for my work. But when I realized who he was, Rebecca's lost love, it became personal, using him to get close to Nancy, to search for any evidence Rebecca might have left behind. It was almost too perfect. And when you couldn't find anything, I decided to eliminate the loose ends. Nancy's declining health provided perfect cover, and once she was gone, I could have focused on building the empire I deserved with Richard's resources. But then I showed up," Chloe said. "Yes, you did. Rebecca's little bastard, grown up and stirring up trouble just like her mother." Ashley's voice was vicious now. "I should have killed you in that hospital bed 28 years ago. But you didn't," a new voice said from the doorway. "Which was your first mistake?" Detective Santos stepped into the basement, her weapon drawn, followed by 3 other officers. "Dr. Ashley Whitaker, you're under arrest for the murders of Rebecca Brooks, Earl Patterson, and Carol Martinez, as well as the attempted murders of Nancy Sullivan, Chloe Sullivan, and Richard Evans." Ashley's face went through a series of expressions: shock, rage, and finally, cold calculation. "You can't prove any of that." "Actually, we can," Santos said. "Thanks to Mr. Evans' quick thinking with his phone, we have your full confession recorded. Plus, the physical evidence in this room should be more than enough to put you away for life." As the officers moved to arrest Ashley, she made one last desperate attempt to grab the syringe from the cabinet, but Richard was faster, tackling her to the ground and pinning her until the police could restrain her. "It's over," he said, breathing hard. "It's finally over." But even as Ashley was led away in handcuffs, screaming about the importance of her research and how they were all fools for not understanding her vision, Chloe knew that some wounds would never fully heal. They'd found the truth and brought Rebecca's killer to justice, but they couldn't bring back the 28 years that had been stolen from them. Still, holding her father's hand as they stood over her mother's remains, Chloe felt something she'd never experienced before. The peace of knowing where she came from, and the strength that came from family, even one that had been broken and rebuilt in the most painful way possible. The arrest of Ashley Whitaker made headlines across Charleston and beyond. "Pharmaceutical heiress exposed as serial killer," screamed the morning papers, while news vans lined the streets outside Evans Pharmaceuticals and the Palmetto Shopping Center. But for Chloe and Richard, the media circus felt distant and unreal compared to the profound grief of finally laying Rebecca to rest. The funeral was small and private, held in the garden behind the flower shop where Chloe had grown up. Nancy, despite her weakened condition, had insisted on attending in her wheelchair, her mind clearer than it had been in months, now that Ashley's poison was finally out of her system. "She would have loved seeing you two together," Nancy said, watching Richard and Chloe place white roses on the simple grave marker they'd chosen. "Rebecca always believed love was stronger than death. I think she was right." Richard knelt beside the grave, placing his half of the heart pendant on the freshly turned earth. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you," he whispered. "Both of you," as the small group of mourners began to disperse. Detective Santos approached them with a manila envelope. "I thought you'd want to see this," she said. "We found it hidden behind a false wall in Ashley's office. She's been keeping trophies." Inside the envelope were dozens of photographs, patients from the illegal clinic, documentation of the experiments, and at the very bottom, a handwritten letter addressed to "My darling Richard and our precious baby." Chloe's hands shook as she unfolded the letter, recognizing her mother's handwriting from the samples they'd found in Nancy's attic. "If you're reading this, then Ashley has done what she threatened to do. I want you both to know that every moment of my life was worth it because it led me to love you, Richard, and to carry our child. I may not live to see our baby grow up, but I need you to know that love doesn't end with death. It transforms into something eternal, Richard. Don't blame yourself for what happened to me. I chose to fight for what was right, knowing the risks, protect our child, teach them to be brave but not reckless, and remember that we will all be together again someday, to my precious baby. If you're old enough to read this, you are the product of the deepest love two people can share. Your father is a good man with a gentle heart." And I pray you inherited his kindness along with his strength. Be proud of who you are. Fight for justice, but never let hatred consume you the way it consumed Ashley. The love we share lives on in you both. Hold on to that when the darkness seems overwhelming. All my love, always and forever. Rebecca, Richard, and Chloe cried together over the letter. 28 years of grief and loss finally finding release. They'd found each other, but the cost had been devastating. 3 weeks later, they thought the worst was behind them. Ashley was in jail awaiting trial. Nancy was recovering steadily. And Richard had begun the process of transforming Evans Pharmaceuticals into a foundation dedicated to ethical medical research. Chloe had moved into the guest house on his property, slowly building the father-daughter relationship they'd been denied, but Ashley Whitaker wasn't finished with them yet. The call came on a Tuesday evening as Chloe and Richard were having dinner on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the Charleston sky in shades of gold and pink. Richard's phone rang, and when he answered it, his face went white. "What do you mean she escaped?" he said into the phone. "How is that possible?" Chloe felt ice water flood her veins as she watched her father's expression grow more grim with each passing second. "We're on our way," Richard said, ending the call. "Ashley broke out of prison transport this morning. 3 guards are dead, and she's been missing for 8 hours. "How?" Chloe asked, already knowing the answer would be terrible. "She had help. Someone with serious resources and connections." Richard was already moving toward the house. "Detective Santos thinks Ashley had contingency plans in place, people who would help her if everything went wrong." As if summoned by their conversation, Chloe's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Riverside Community Clinic ruins. 1 hour. Come alone or Nancy dies." Attached was a photo that made Chloe's blood run cold. Nancy, bound to a chair in what looked like the old clinic basement, her eyes wide with terror above a strip of duct tape covering her mouth. "She has Nancy," Chloe said, showing Richard the message. "We call Detective Santos," Richard said immediately. "We don't negotiate with her. She'll kill Nancy before the police can get there." "You know she will. And if we go, she'll kill all of us, Chloe. This is exactly what she wants, to draw us into a trap." But Chloe was already grabbing her keys. "I can't let Nancy die because of me. She's the only family I've ever known." "I'm your family too," Richard said desperately. "And I'm not losing you the same way I lost your mother. Then come with me." "But I'm going either way." The drive to the clinic ruins was silent, both of them knowing they were probably driving toward their deaths. The old building had been partially demolished years ago, leaving only the concrete shell in the basement level where they'd found Rebecca's body. It was the perfect place for Ashley to make her final stand. They parked a block away and approached on foot, using the shadows of the ruined building for cover. The basement entrance was open, and they could see flickering light from candles or lanterns coming from below. "Remember," Richard whispered, "if we get separated, run. Don't try to be a hero." They descended the concrete steps carefully, their footsteps echoing in the narrow stairwell. At the bottom, they found Ashley waiting for them in the same room where Rebecca had died. She looked completely different now. Gone was any pretense of civilized behavior. Her hair was wild, her clothes dirty, and there was something feral in her eyes. Nancy sat tied to a chair in the center of the room, conscious but clearly drugged. Her eyes followed their movement, but she seemed unable to focus properly. "Welcome to the reunion," Ashley said, holding a gun pointed directly at Nancy's head. "I have to say, I'm impressed you both came, although I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Heroism seems to run in your family." "Let Nancy go," Chloe said. "Your fight is with us, not her." "Oh, but it is with her," Ashley replied. "Nancy's the one who took you away from me 28 years ago. If she'd just minded her own business, I could have disposed of you properly as a baby, and none of this would have happened." "What do you want?" Richard asked. "Justice," Ashley said simply. "I spent my entire adult life building something beautiful, something that would advance human knowledge and save countless lives, and you destroyed it all for the sake of a few expendable people who were going to die anyway." "You're insane," Chloe said. "I'm a visionary, but since you can't appreciate that, I'll settle for revenge." Ashley's grip tightened on the gun. "I'm going to kill all 3 of you, but not quickly. I want you to suffer the way you made me suffer." She moved the gun from Nancy to Chloe. "You first, I think, let Daddy watch his little girl die the same way he watched Rebecca die." "Wait," Richard said, stepping forward. "I'll make you a deal. Take me instead. Let them go, and you can do whatever you want to me." Ashley laughed. "Oh, Richard, still trying to save everyone, aren't you? That's what got Rebecca killed in the first place." "I know," Richard said quietly, "and I've lived with that guilt every day for 28 years. But I won't let my daughter pay for my mistakes. Touching, but I'm afraid I can't accept your offer, you see. Killing just one of you wouldn't be nearly enough payment for what you've cost me." Ashley raised the gun toward Chloe, her finger tightening on the trigger. But in that split second, Richard threw himself forward, putting his body between the gun and his daughter. The shot echoed through the concrete chamber like thunder. Richard staggered backward, clutching his chest as blood spread across his shirt. But he remained standing, his eyes locked on Ashley with fierce determination. "You missed," he said through gritted teeth. "No," Ashley replied, raising the gun again. "I didn't." The second shot caught Richard's center mass, dropping him to his knees. But even as he fell, he pulled something from his pocket, a device Chloe recognized as the emergency beacon he'd started carrying after Ashley's escape. "Police, already coming," he gasped, blood foaming at his lips. "GPS, activated when we entered the building." Ashley's face contorted with rage. "You clever bastard." She pointed the gun at Chloe again, but Richard used the last of his strength to grab Ashley's ankle, throwing off her aim. The shot went wide, and Chloe lunged forward, wrestling for control of the weapon. In the struggle, the gun went off again. Ashley screamed and fell backward, clutching her shoulder where the bullet had grazed her. Chloe kicked the weapon away and rushed to her father's side. Richard was dying, even without medical training. She could see that. The light was already fading from his eyes, but he managed to reach into his shirt and pull out both halves of the heart pendant. "For you," he whispered, pressing them into Chloe's hands. "Your mother and I, we love you so much. Don't leave me," Chloe sobbed. "I just found you. Never leaving," Richard said, his voice barely audible. "Love doesn't die, remember what your mother wrote." His hand went limp in hers, just as the sound of sirens reached the basement. Ashley was screaming incoherently, clutching her wounded shoulder and ranting about her destroyed life's work. But Chloe barely heard any of it. She sat holding her father's body, the two halves of the heart pendant clutched in her bloody hands, and felt the weight of being the last survivor of a love story that had spanned nearly 3 decades. The love her parents had shared lived on in her, but the price of that legacy had been almost everything she held dear. The trial of Ashley Whitaker became the most watched criminal proceeding in Charleston's history. For 6 months, the courtroom was packed with reporters, victims' families, and medical professionals horrified by the scope of Ashley's crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Carol's photographs, her detailed journal, Richard's recorded confession from the clinic basement, and the physical evidence found in Ashley's hidden files. Chloe sat in the front row every day, Nancy beside her in a wheelchair, both women serving as living reminders of the lives Ashley had destroyed. The defendant showed no remorse, even attempting to justify her actions during her testimony. "Those people were dying anyway," Ashley said from the witness stand, her voice cold and clinical, despite the orange jumpsuit and shackles. "Drug addicts, homeless individuals, illegal immigrants with no future prospects. At least their deaths contributed to medical advancement that saved thousands of other lives, including infants," prosecutor Janet Morrison asked, holding up the hospital bracelet that had been found with Rebecca's remains. "You murdered a young mother in front of her newborn child. I prevented the dissemination of information that would have destroyed decades of crucial research," Ashley replied without flinching. Rebecca Brooks was standing in the way of progress. The gallery erupted in angry voices, and Judge Harrison had to bang his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Chloe felt sick listening to Ashley reduce her mother's murder to a business decision. Dr. David Chen, Nancy's physician, testified about the exotic poisons found in Nancy's system. The compounds Dr. Whitaker administered were experimental neurotoxins designed to mimic the progression of Alzheimer's disease. The dosage was carefully calculated to cause maximum cognitive decline while appearing to be natural disease progression. "How long would this have taken to kill the patient?" Morrison asked. "Another 6 months, perhaps a year. It would have appeared to be a natural decline from her existing condition." when Earl Patterson's daughter took the stand, describing how her father had been terrified for weeks before his death, speaking of old secrets and dangerous people. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. He said someone was watching him, she testified. Said he should have spoken up years ago about what he saw at that clinic, but he was scared. The night before he died, he told me he'd finally found the courage to do the right thing. Ashley's defense team, led by high-profile attorney Marcus Sterling, attempted to paint their client as a misguided idealist whose work had been taken out of context. Dr. Whitaker dedicated her life to advancing medical science, Sterling argued during closing statements. Yes, her methods were unorthodox, but the medications developed through her research have saved countless lives. She saw the bigger picture that others couldn't see, but Prosecutor Morrison's closing argument was devastating. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't about medical advancement or the greater good. It's about a woman who decided she had the right to play God with other people's lives. Rebecca Brooks wasn't standing in the way of progress. She was trying to protect innocent people from being murdered in the name of science. Morrison gestured toward Chloe and Nancy. The defendant didn't just kill Rebecca Brooks. She stole 28 years from a father and daughter, slowly poisoned an elderly woman for 2 years, and orchestrated the deaths of anyone who threatened to expose her crimes. This isn't medical research. It's systematic murder. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours when they returned. The foreman stood with the verdict in his hand, his voice steady and clear. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Rebecca Brooks, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Earl Patterson, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of murder in the first degree in the death of Carol Martinez, we find the defendant guilty. The litany of guilty verdicts continued for nearly 10 minutes, covering murders, attempted murders, conspiracy, and medical malpractice. Ashley showed no emotion as each verdict was read, sitting ramrod straight with her hands folded in her lap. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for the following week. But everyone knew Ashley Whitaker would never see freedom again. After the verdict, Chloe and Nancy were approached by FBI agent Rebecca Torres, who had been investigating the broader conspiracy surrounding the illegal clinics. We've uncovered evidence that Dr. Whitaker's network was much larger than initially thought, Torres explained as they sat in a quiet conference room at the courthouse. There were at least 12 other facilities operating similar programs across the Southeast, all connected through a web of pharmaceutical companies and research institutions. How many victims? Chloe asked. Conservative estimate. Over 300 people died in these experiments over a 15-year period. But Dr. Whitaker's testimony and the evidence from her files are helping us identify other perpetrators and facilities. Nancy, who had been silent throughout the conversation, suddenly spoke up. Richard would be proud, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in years. He always said his company should help people, not hurt them. The FBI investigation led to arrests across multiple states. Dr. Whitaker's confession, given in a failed attempt to negotiate a plea deal, implicated dozens of other doctors, researchers, and pharmaceutical executives. The scandal rocked the medical establishment and led to sweeping reforms in how clinical trials were conducted and monitored. 3 months after the trial ended, Chloe stood in the executive conference room of what was now called the Rebecca Brooks Evans Foundation, looking out over Charleston Harbor. The transformation of Evans Pharmaceuticals had been Richard's final gift to her. Detailed instructions left in his will explaining how to restructure the company as a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing free medical care to underserved populations. Miss Evans, the voice belonged to Dr. Sarah Kim, the foundation's new medical director. The board is ready for your presentation. Chloe had legally changed her name to honor both her parents. Though she would always think of herself as Chloe Sullivan in her heart, Nancy had insisted on the change, saying it was time for her to claim her full identity. The boardroom was filled with medical professionals, community leaders, and representatives from patient advocacy groups. At the head of the table sat Nancy, now serving as the foundation's chairman. Despite her age and health challenges, the treatments to counteract Ashley's poisons had been successful, but the damage wasn't completely reversible. Still, Nancy was determined to spend whatever time she had left, ensuring that her brother's sacrifice and Rebecca's death would lead to positive change. 6 months ago, this company was complicit in some of the most horrific medical crimes in modern history, Chloe began, her voice steady despite the emotion she felt. Today, we're announcing the opening of 12 free clinics across South Carolina, providing healthcare to the people who need it most. She clicked to the next slide, showing photographs of the construction sites where the new clinics were being built. Each facility will be named for one of Ashley Whitaker's victims, ensuring that their names are remembered not as statistics, but as human beings whose lives had value. The centerpiece of the foundation's work would be the Rebecca Brooks Memorial Clinic, built on the exact site where the Riverside Community Clinic had once stood. The shopping center had been purchased and demolished, the contaminated basement properly remediated, and the entire area transformed into a healing space. "We can't bring back the people who were murdered in the name of medical progress," Chloe continued, "but we can honor their memory by ensuring that healthcare is about healing, not exploitation." After the presentation, Chloe walked through the memorial garden that had been planted behind the flower shop. Richard was buried next to Rebecca now, their graves marked by a single headstone that read, "Together at last, love never dies, it only transforms." Nancy joined her, moving slowly with her walker but insisting on making the trip every day. "I've been thinking about what Richard said before he died," Nancy said, settling onto the bench they'd placed between the graves. "About love not dying. I think he was right." Chloe touched the pendant at her throat. "Both halves of the heart now joined together on a single chain. I can feel them sometimes, like they're still here, watching over us." "They are," Nancy said with certainty. "Love like that doesn't just disappear. It becomes part of everything good we do in their memory." As the sun set over Charleston, Chloe thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of loss would never completely fade, but it had been transformed into something powerful, a determination to make sure that other families would never have to endure what hers had suffered. Ashley Whitaker had taken 28 years from them, but she hadn't been able to destroy the love that connected them across time and death. In the end, that love had proven stronger than all of Ashley's hatred and ambition. Justice had finally awakened, and with it, the promise of healing for all the lives that had been touched by Ashley's crimes. 1 year after Richard's death, Chloe stood in the memorial garden behind what had once been just a simple flower shop, and was now the headquarters of the Rebecca Brooks Evans Foundation. The October morning was crisp and clear, with golden sunlight filtering through the oak trees that had been planted to honor each of Ashley's victims. The garden had become a place of pilgrimage for the families of those who had died in the illegal medical experiments. Every week, someone new would arrive with flowers or a small memento. Adding to the growing collection of tributes that surrounded the memorial wall, "The dedication ceremony is in an hour," Dr. Sarah Kim said, approaching with a clipboard and her usual efficient smile. "The mayor will be here, along with representatives from the Medical Ethics Board and about 40 journalists." Chloe nodded, adjusting the red roses in her hands. Rebecca's favorites, according to Nancy's increasingly clear memories. The withdrawal from Ashley's poisons had been like watching her grandmother emerge from a fog that had clouded her mind for years. Nancy still had good days and bad days, but she was more present now, more herself than she'd been since Chloe was a teenager. "How are you holding up?" Dr. Kim asked gently. Sarah had become more than just the foundation's medical director. She'd become a friend, one of the few people who understood the weight of carrying on Richard's legacy. "Better than I expected," Chloe admitted. "It still hurts, but it's different now. The pain has purpose." The memorial being dedicated today was the crown jewel of the foundation's work. The Rebecca Brooks Memorial Clinic, built on the exact site where the old Riverside Community Clinic had conducted its horrific experiments. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Where death and exploitation had once reigned, there would now be healing and hope. Nancy appeared around the corner of the building, moving slowly but steadily with her walker. At 80, she was frailer than she'd once been, but her mind was sharp and her spirit unbroken. She'd insisted on giving the opening remarks at today's ceremony, despite Chloe's worries about her stamina. "Don't fuss," Nancy said, reading Chloe's expression. "I've been practicing this speech for weeks. Rebecca and Richard deserve to have their story told properly." Together, they walked to the clinic's main entrance, where a crowd was already gathering. Chloe recognized many faces, survivors of Ashley's experiments who had come forward during the trial, family members of victims, medical professionals who had been working to reform clinical trial practices. But it was the unexpected faces that moved her most. Earl Patterson's daughter had driven down from Columbia to attend. Carol Martinez's son had flown in from California. Even some of the homeless individuals who had been victimized by the clinic but survived were there, dressed in their best clothes and carrying themselves with a dignity that spoke to their resilience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mayor Johnson began, stepping up to the podium that had been placed beside the clinic's main door. "We gather today not just to open a medical facility, but to transform a place of horror into a beacon of hope." He spoke about the importance of ethical medicine and the need to remember the victims of medical abuse. Then he introduced Nancy, who made her way to the podium with careful, determined steps. "My name is Nancy Sullivan," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. 28 years ago, my niece Rebecca Brooks was murdered in the basement beneath where we now stand. She died because she believed that every life has value, that medicine should heal rather than harm. Nancy's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Rebecca left behind a daughter she never got to raise and a man she never got to marry, but she also left behind a legacy of courage that we honor today." She gestured toward the clinic building, its walls painted a warm yellow that seemed to glow in the sunlight. "This clinic will provide free health care to anyone who needs it, regardless of their ability to pay or their place in society. It will be staffed by doctors who take their oath to do no harm seriously, and it will serve as a reminder that medical science at its best is about compassion, not exploitation." The crowd applauded as Nancy stepped back from the podium, and Chloe moved forward to take her place. She'd been dreading this moment for weeks, but as she looked out at the assembled faces, she felt a sense of calm descend over her. "My name is Chloe Evans," she said, the name still feeling new on her tongue, despite the legal change months ago. "I'm Rebecca Brooks' daughter and Richard Evans' daughter, and I'm here today because two people loved each other so deeply that their love survived even death." She told the story then, the whole truth about Rebecca's investigation, Ashley's crimes, and the 28 years of lies and manipulation that had kept a family apart. She spoke about Richard's sacrifice and Nancy's quiet heroism in protecting a child who wasn't even her own. "Ashley Whitaker thought she could bury the truth along with her victims," Chloe said, as she neared the end of her remarks. "She thought that by silencing the witnesses and destroying the evidence, she could rewrite history to make herself the hero of her own story." She touched the pendant at her throat, and "Both halves of the heart now permanently joined together. But love leaves traces that can't be erased. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried. And justice, even when it's delayed, is still justice." Chloe stepped aside as the ceremonial ribbon was cut, officially opening the Rebecca Brooks Memorial Clinic. As the crowd began to tour the facility, she found herself standing alone for a moment in the memorial garden, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. "They would be so proud of you," a voice said behind her. Chloe turned to see Dr. Torres, the FBI agent who had led the investigation into Ashley's network of illegal clinics. "Any word on the other cases?" Chloe asked. 43 convictions so far, with more trials pending. The reforms your foundation helped push through Congress are already preventing new abuses." Torres paused, studying Chloe's face. "You know, there's something I never told you about your father's final call to 911. "What do you mean?" "The recording. He didn't just activate the GPS beacon. He left a message. His last words before." Torres pulled out her phone and scrolled through her files. "I thought you might want to hear it." She handed Chloe earbuds, and Chloe listened with tears streaming down her face as her father's voice, weak but determined, came through the speakers. "Tell my daughter. Tell Chloe that love doesn't end. It just changes form. Tell her to use ours to heal the world." When the recording ended, Chloe handed back the earbuds with shaking hands. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." Later that evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the clinic had seen its first patients, Chloe sat in the memorial garden with Nancy, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you think they're at peace now?" Chloe asked, looking at the graves where Rebecca and Richard lay side by side. Nancy considered the question carefully. "I think they're exactly where they're supposed to be. Together, and surrounded by the good that came from their love." A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, and for just a moment, Chloe could have sworn she felt a presence beside her. Warm, protective, filled with the kind of love that transcends physical death. "The clinic treated 47 patients today," she told the graves. People who couldn't afford health care anywhere else. People who were written off by the system, but found healing here. She stood and placed fresh roses on both graves, the red petals bright against the green grass. Ashley tried to destroy our family, but she only made it stronger. Love really doesn't die. It just finds new ways to express itself. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Chloe walked back toward the flower shop. Nancy's arm linked through hers. Tomorrow would bring new patients to the clinic, new stories of healing and hope. The foundation was already planning to open 3 more facilities across the state, each one named for a victim of medical abuse. Each one a testament to the belief that every life has value. The pendant around Chloe's neck caught the light from the street lamps, the 2 halves of the heart reflecting a golden glow. It was no longer a symbol of something broken, but of something whole. A love story that had spanned nearly 3 decades and would continue to inspire acts of healing for generations to come. Ashley Whitaker had tried to write herself into history as a medical pioneer, but she would be remembered only as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. The real legacy belonged to Rebecca and Richard, whose love had proved stronger than death, and whose sacrifice had created something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. As Chloe locked the door of the flower shop behind her, she whispered a promise to the night air. "I'll keep using your love to heal the world, I promise." And somewhere in the gentle Carolina breeze, she could have sworn she heard an answer. 2 voices, speaking as one. "We know you will."